Welcome to another episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solutions Providers Association. Our goal on the pod is to accelerate the success of today's and tomorrow's leaders in the retail IT industry. I'm Jim Roddy, back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, as always, we talk with leaders in the retail IT channel about their leadership journeys and what they've learned along the way. And in this episode, we're going to talk with Steve Martorelli, the founder and CEO of Turnkey Processing, a hybrid VAR ISO headquartered in Connecticut that offers solutions related to point of sale, merchant services, and marketing services. Steve, welcome to the Trusted Advisor.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, for sure. So now I gave like a one-sentence description of your company. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about the story of Turnkey Processing, when and how it started, and what the company looks like today?
Sure, absolutely. In a nutshell, we'll start with the story of me as a kid. I always used to side hustle anything I could as a little kid, whether it be shoveling snow for people. Really, actually, my first ambition was to be a Ninja Turtle, but everyone told me that would not be possible. So there's still a little hope there somewhere in my heart, but I got really into, doing service, right? So shoveling people's driveways when it snowed. Later on, high school and college, I made my way through DJing. So I never had like a formal job on the books, but I kind of always paved my own way. And through kind of a random friend while I was in law school, not really a random friend, a really good childhood friend, started talking to me about a random idea of starting a credit card processing company, which sounded absolutely like a commodity business and I don't know, very generic idea. I said, sure, let's get going. That's how Turnkey started, but it was really when I made my way out to Las Vegas one time. I don't know if it was a bachelor party or some kind of trade show or something, but I had always heard about a company called Zappos. So I said, I'm in town. Let me go take a field trip. I visited Zappos and I was really amazed what they had built and what they were doing out there. And that really inspired me to think more of us as a service company that just happened to sell blank. And that was the motto that I brought back to Turnkey. And that's really was our really big ambition. I'll call it our BHAG or whatever you want to call it, was let's become the Zappos of merchant services.
Got your big BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. So how old were you at that point?
So I started Turnkey 15 years ago. And I'm going to say, what was I, like 23, 24, okay. 39 now. So yeah, just I was attending law school, evening law school. This was my day hustle. And really by the end of law school, this started to become something. And I was really more passionate about business than going into law, but it's always been a great tool for me to have in the utility belt.
Sure. Now, I've done that Zappos tour that you did as well. In fact, we did it. It was a handful of executives from the in our industry. I can't remember. It was how Retail Now was set up in the past. So for folks who don't know, Retail Now is the RSPA's annual summer convention and education conference. There was a gap like on a Monday, and a bunch of us just all got together and did the tour there. Tony Shea, the late founder of Zappos, he was just sitting there at his desk out in the middle of everybody. Hey, Tony, how we doing? They
awesome.
They had all the conference rooms that got painted by the employees there. So like, what was it about that tour that stood out for you that you found inspiring?
Well, so first of all, I think me and you got to share the same experience of pre-Amazon acquisition.
Yes,
when
it was.
Really got to go. Yeah, you really got to go behind the scenes. And for me, I had no expectations going, zero. I read about it in business school and college, and I was like, it sounded like a quirky, cool company. Let me check it out. Never really expected. But we were greeted at the front door by the receptionist, and she's like, yeah, let me take you backstage. Suit is completely non-formal, just went back there. And it was amazing to me. People were having celebrations. There was a chief, celebrations officer. They had a KPI for somebody who's been on the phone the longest with a customer. It was like 13 hours. Mm-hmm. Just a lot of amazing stuff they were doing. They had a cafeteria, a gym, where they'd give people free lunch, or like you could buy premium lunch for $3. So just a lot of really cool, fun ideas. And what really was amazing to me is that people were, they had lines out the door applying to get a position here. I don't know, it was like 1 out of 3,000 people got the job. And they didn't necessarily pay the highest wages or anything else. They treated everybody great. They gave them a great, wage, but it's not like they're paying everybody $100,000 a year, right? They were offering people a fair wage and a really great culture, and it was driving people there. And what really impressed me too was the fact that they gave people the idea of like, hey, if you try it before you buy it, right? So you try it for 3 months and you either take $3,000 and walk out the door, or welcome to the team. So then there's like some skin in the game too. I really liked all the stuff they were coming up with, was just like mind blowing to me back then. So
Yeah, and all very much people oriented. And it's interesting because Zappos, they're not subtle about what their company, I'll use in the past tense, stood for, like you said, pre-acquisition. And so your company is the same way as well, right? You're not subtle about that at all. So your website, it features a detailed page about your company culture. It lists your 7 core values. There's also on your website, it says a message from the founder. And on those pages, you introduce the word remarkablism. And so, can you tell our audience what remarkablism is and how it guides you as a leader and guides you as an
sure.
organization? And I've never seen the word before, so am I pronouncing remarkablism correctly?
That's it. You got it. And it sounds like you did some homework and some digging to find that on our website. But yeah, so Remarkablism, it kind of started just as a small little joke in the office, but our very first core value was provide remarkable service. And it sooner or later, somebody, the word remarkable was floating around. And then one day I just came out with it. I was like, hey, why don't we just call this Remarkablism? So it kind of gained some traction. Everybody was on board with it. And really, what it evolved into is less of a first core value. We still have our provide remarkable service, but remarkablism became more of a philosophy of life. And for me, that's basically a personal, never-ending cycle of growth. And there's 3 domains: there's physical, mental, and spiritual. And the key thing that I learned over time, and I think this is a mistake a lot of people make, and especially when you're younger, social media, all these things, is you're always constantly in this race, you feel like, to compare yourself to other people. But when you really start to look inward and just look at your own metrics, right? You versus you, last year versus this year, you can cultivate a lot more happiness and success that way. And that's really what the philosophy is. So, Turnkey is my platform to live by that, and hopefully spread that to others as well.
Got it. Thank you for that. And it's funny you bring that up because I was just talking to a leadership coach earlier this week, and he was talking about how if your drive is compared with other people, if they slow down, then that gives you permission to slow down, right? And you don't have anything consistent. It sounds like what you're saying is along the lines of what he had is if you've got that engine going inside you, inside all your teammates, and it's the self challenge, not the way that the world spins you around and round or slow or fast. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like it's got to be something inside. It's got to be that fire in the belly is really the key.
Absolutely. So me personally, I try to live by that. I do live by that, getting rid of the word try, and I do live by that. I practice that on the daily. And I think over the last few years, a lot of people have seen a lot big transformations happen. Really, over the last 10 years, people have been with us, they've seen transformations in me, followed by transformations in the company. And that's how we've been continuing to grow. And just this year, I just came up with a wacky idea one day. I said, we're going to create a Remarkablism challenge for 2025, and listed out a whole bunch of habits, check-in things for people to do, and it was completely voluntary. I also challenged people to come up with some big goals for themselves, and came up with like a gamification of all this, where if you do your daily check-ins on different habits, you get different points for them, and whoever gets the most points at the end of the year, we're actually going to give them $3,000 towards their dream vacation or their bucket list experience, whatever they want to do.
Wow, very nice. Now, how did the team respond to that?
So I really didn't know what was going to happen. It's either going to be a flop or, but I feel like right now there's some magic in the air.
Okay.
Even before I came into this interview, I was asking some people some questions, and they were like, really, they said, it got me inspired about myself, like thinking about what could I do this year. And we got some really ambitious targets. We have some folks that are looking to lose 100 pounds this year. We
Wow.
have some folks that want to create a feature length film of 90 minutes. I got another guy who said, I want to learn how to do a backflip by the end of the year. Now, he's in his mid 40s. I'm going to say not super athletic. So we were all like, dude, if you can do that, you're winning. You are winning.
And just make sure he doesn't do it on company grounds, right? You don't want that to be a workers' comp
Make sure we get a
situation.
life insurance policy or something first, right?
Yes, comfort of your own home to do that. So I guess, so tell me this, there's a reputation that is in the point of sale industry that some businesses have been far less today than there were a few years ago, lifestyle businesses. Like, are you thinking is that drive, you think, going to be something that you can sustain over the long period of time? Or there's also, you wouldn't be the first person in the payments or POS industry to be like, hey, there's residual income's pretty good. I'm going to go put into cruise control. I guess what's your thoughts on that? I mean, you're 39, so
Yeah.
you're still on the younger side, but I guess what's your take on that?
All right. So the long and short of that, I'll give you the short story of that. My grandfather drove a bulldozer till he was 80 years old, and they literally had told him, "You can't drive anymore. You just backed into someone's car and probably could have killed somebody." Right.
Okay, all
So
right.
that's like where I come from. But beyond that, I think my philosophy is that if you're not growing, you're dying. So, everybody needs growth. If you don't have that growth, if you get to a point of stagnation, you're going to start losing your top talent. They're going to go elsewhere because those people are looking to grow. And it's really about what you want, right? And I see this happen all the time because we deal with lots of small business. I see people with that drive and that passion to keep going. And I see people are like, no, like I've reached this level of comfortability. So in a way, I think it's different for everybody, but for me, getting turning into a lifestyle business is kind of like basically saying you're checked out, right? You're selling out, you're done. You've reached your top of your mountain. That's the end.
You're not thinking about growing anymore. So, what
Right.
activities do you engage in to ensure that you experience growth, both as a person and as a leader? Like, what are the things that you do to stay sharp?
Sure. So, really, like one of our values here, our third core value is always be learning. And yeah, I wanted to tweak the always be closing thing to always be learning.
Hmm.
And really, I think there's three domains that you can learn from. One is really kind of like tactile feedback. What are you learning out in the field? What are you getting for feedback from customers, from employees? Then another point is reflection, right? Taking that time every day to reflect. Me personally, I do what professional sports people do. I keep a journal, well better how journal, and I take some time to meditate. Last year I was doing 15 minutes a day. This year I'm going to up the ante to 30 minutes a day, and really just think about what could you do better? How could you have said something better? And then I think there's also academic, right? Because we can learn every day in our environment, but it's also where do we push ourselves? What books are we reading? You look at some of the really big visionaries out there, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, these guys crush books, you know?
Hmm. Got it. And along those lines, what are some books that have impacted you? Um, what's
Sure.
impacted your
So
life?
I'll tell you my last book, which was kind of a very strange story of how I got there, but I had heard the name Yogananda came up through some kind of podcast or something. And apparently, Steve Jobs, when he died at his funeral, he left one thing for everybody who attended the funeral was this book by Yogananda, the autobiography. So I said, if Steve Jobs, if it was important enough for him to leave this as his last dying wish for everyone to read it, I figured I'd check it out. I ended up visiting my sister in California, randomly ended up in Encinitas one day and literally went to this like public garden to check it out, not knowing anything. We followed this path down next to this water, and some like Buddhist monks came out of a building and like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And I said, we just kind of followed the path. And they're like, "Oh, was the gate open?" I said, "What gate?" So they like politely walked me out and they said, "Yeah, there's actually a gate here, but I guess it was open." I said, "What do you guys do here anyways?" They're like, "Well, this is where Yogananda used to live." I'm like, "Huh, I just heard that name." So they're telling me all about it. I got the book. It was like 550 pages. Took me a little time to read it because written in the early 1900s, but
Oh, wow.
super deep spiritual book. I think it's a really amazing read. And really, actually, that's what kind of triggered my drive to start meditating more.
Got it. Interesting. I will definitely check that out. First, I'll have to figure out how to spell it, but I'm sure Google and Word can help me with
I'll
that.
email
So
you after.
I
For
appreciate
sure.
that. Thanks. So you mentioned always be learning, and so the full principle says be curious, seek feedback. What you just alluded to, read voraciously and reflect deeply. So you talked about how you do that. How do you do that inside your organization and have it get into the flow of the day-to-day activities, right? Because everybody's busy. I got to finish this job, but you're talking about always be learning at the same time. How do you integrate those things while you're still, impacting the bottom line in the short term?
Sure. It's definitely more of a carrot than a stick approach. We have a book club. So we encourage people to pick any kind of book that they want to read that inspires them. It could be self-help, it could be business, it could be literally a fiction book. And we will reward them with a gift card if they read it and turn in a simple book report. And when I say book report, it's not like you had to do even in middle school. It's literally like, hey, what are three things you learned here? What's something you're going to do different, right? A couple
Hmm.
reflections that you actually read the book and put some thought into it. So those gift cards can range anywhere from 25 bucks to $100, depends on what book it is.
Got it. And what, like, do all your employees participate? Is it one? Like, what's the ballpark? How many folks really race after that carrot?
Sure. I'd say there's probably about 20 to 30% who really like integrate that into their lives. And a lot of
Yeah.
people like to learn in their own way. So some people just do audiobooks and podcasts on their own, and they don't bother to put a thing in. But I think, and all across the company, people are making efforts to learn, whether it's, even technical things, figuring out a new equipment that we're selling or, training. So
Got it. Well, I'm guessing 20 to 30% is probably 19 to 29% higher than most of the organizations out there, right? Because a lot of people just they're not able to consume that kind of
yeah.
information.
I'm actually
Before we,
interested to see this year. I think there's gonna be an uptick because that's a couple of the habits in there for people
okay.
now they're more aware of it. I think we'll have to touch base next year, see how we do this year after the
Good. No,
challenge.
I'd be happy to check back in.
Sure, sure.
Um, Before we take a quick break, I want to ask about another principle. It's egos at the door. And so I'm curious, like everybody, you put that up on the wall and everyone's like, yes, I will definitely check my ego at the door. But how do you actually execute on that? Like, can you share a story about you or your
Sure.
team acting on the egos at the door principle?
Sure. Well, I think core values are pretty well known at this point, the importance of them, all those things. And I think the way you really find your core values is one is you look to see what's inside you and you write those down, right? So when we first started, it was like learning, it was providing remarkable service, it was working as a team. But then I started to discover other ones by kind of looking at the opposite side of things, right? Who are the people that don't work out here? What are the commonalities and patterns and
Hmm.
traits between those people? And what I really boiled it down to is this concept of egos at the door. Patrick Lencioni, later learned, he calls it smart, hungry, and humble, right? That's his
Yes.
word.
Yep.
And I think really what it comes down to is, are you open to being questioned and challenged? So my leadership style, I'm happy to have a debate with anybody about anything, and there's no hard feelings. And I think some people coming into the organization, and I'll give you one example. We had a sales manager came in from another, company making, X 100K per year. And he came to Turnkey and he was being challenged on a lot of things and asked, how can we do this better? And he finally kind of like lost it during a quarterly meeting one time. And he was like, why can't we just come to these meetings and, talk about budget and what are you doing and pat each other on the back? And that's it. Why do we always have to think about what are we doing better and challenging this? And like he got really upset and he basically walked out the door and said, I quit.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
all looked around and we're like, oh shit, okay, well, I guess we're gonna learn how to do our own sales management. um, Later, he actually told me on Monday he didn't mean it. He wanted to come back, but we decided that we needed to move on. So I think that was a decisive action at that moment in time. We're like, okay, we've identified something here that exists in our DNA, and we can't have people that don't mesh with that because there's always going to be that clash forever.
Yes, and everybody will have different levels of that, but it sounds like what you're talking about is if your culture just can't be on the wall, if you have way more people who live by that culture, those who don't are really going to stand out, and either you will ask them to leave the organization, or they will themselves kind of self-select
Sure.
with it. Like, is that kind of
Yeah,
what is? You got to make sure you're
there's a
feeding the right
comfort
people.
level. I think
Yeah,
you're right on, right? Everyone has a comfort. No one likes to be questioned or challenged, right?
yeah,
But there's a certain comfort level to it. Whether if it's coming from a positive place, most people don't have a problem with it. But some people who have a very prideful, stance and posture take it extremely defensively. And it's tough because you can't walk on eggshells and dance around things like that. We have to be fluid. We have to be able to challenge and question each other,
yeah.
especially because best practices are always evolving. So what worked yesterday could change tomorrow.
That is correct. And that you have just because it worked 2 months ago, 2 years ago, 2 decades ago. There's some things that are obviously, like honesty and,
Sure.
work ethic and things of that nature. But yeah, you've got to be open to doing that. So, all right, let's pause here to let our listeners and viewers know about the Retail Solutions Providers Association. The RSPA is North America's largest community of retail technology VARs, software providers, vendors, ISOs, and distributors. To accelerate your success as an RSP member, email membership@gorspa.org. Also, we want to say thanks to our sponsors who support the RSP community and make this podcast and video series possible. Our platinum sponsor is Blue Star. Our gold sponsors are CoCard, Epson, Heartland, and ScanSource. And then finally, make sure you save the date for Retail Now 2025, the Retail IT Channel's #1 trade show, education, conference, and networking event. This year's event is set for July 27th through 29th at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. For more information, visit gorspa.org/retail now. Retail Now is where the industry meets. All right, so we've talked at kind of a higher level about from your organization and how you lead. How would you describe your leadership style? Like, are there a few overarching words or phrases that represent what you're striving for as a leader and how you would like your team to describe you?
Sure. I think I would be pretty accurate in describing myself as optimistic, demanding, and supportive. I think one of my, at least what I get from other people is they enjoy my positivity. I think I give them a hope for a better future. And even the comments I've been receiving about this challenge, people have literally come up to me and be like, I wouldn't have actually done this if it wasn't for you creating this challenge. This is cool. I'm excited. Um, I think demanding, I have very high expectations, and I really push people outside their comfort zone. So that is a strength and a weakness sometimes if I push too far, but people know what they're signing up for. And supportive though, because they always know, like at the end of the day, I'm there to support them. So if people come to me with problems, we're here to solve it. We're not trying to get people in trouble or, crucify them or anything like that.
Got it. So can you talk about the importance of, it seems like if you're only demanding without being supportive, right? It's almost like an unfunded mandate. You're just driving people and they're like, I don't have the tools to do my job. But if
Right.
you're only supportive without being demanding, be like, I support you working only three
Right.
hours this week, right?
Right.
That you could
Right.
do something like that. So can you talk about how do you, put I guess what is it, the yin and the yang or whatever together
Sure.
of that?
Whatever you want to call it. I think, they're kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum that also need to be balanced. And I think, if you have, at the end of the day, you're a company, you're not a family, right? Which is more aligned with a professional sports team. So you have to be demanding, you have to be results oriented, you have to really push people beyond their comfort zone, or else they're not going to grow and we're not going to achieve those next targets that we want to have. On the same time, you can't just be an overbearing dictator, right? You also have to be supportive and understanding and empathetic. So I think
Got it.
balancing those two, and mentoring people at the same time pushing them, challenging them, I think that's what you really have to, that's all I
Got
could
it.
say.
No, I appreciate that. I'm curious. I want to talk about some of your experiences, like from earlier in your career, that shaped you as a leader, right? You talked about that experience touring Zappos. Can you talk about another learning experience or like one story that's really stuck with you and shaped you as a leader, and it's almost like always in the back of your mind and really shapes the way that you lead and you behave?
Sure. Um, I guess what I'll call is my coming of age story. Um, it's different for everybody, but I think really it's the adversities that shape us as leaders, right? It's, we're not
Hmm.
really being shaped during the good times. It's really the difficult times that test us and tell us who we are. And for me, that happened about, oh, I'd say about 7 or 8 years into the business. And this was with, like I mentioned before, started the business with a childhood friend that we were close since high school all the way onward. And we got to an inflection point where in the very beginning it was go, go, go. And we got to this first level of success, maybe 1 million in revenue. And that was a major inflection point because we both wanted to go in different ways. And I think you might actually said it the best, right? The lifestyle company.
Hmm.
I knew the writing was on the wall. If we didn't grow, we were gonna die. We're gonna lose our best people. And for him, kind of opposite core values, and also like this is my time to kind of coast and be the absentee owner. And it was really that inflection point, which created some critical conversations. And ultimately, it turned into a pretty bad partnership breakup
Mm.
with not even amicable departure. It turned into two competing companies going after the same customer base. And we had people that, really core people that are still here today. They stayed on with Turnkey and really fought to retain our clients and to make it through it. We ended up making out of that year, even though we lost some big customers, we ended up still growing that year. And then ever since then, we really just took off because we were able to bring on better people, just continue growing and scaling with the culture and the values that we wanted to create for ourselves.
And so, what did you learn from that? Besides, like, you should only have the sole proprietor own
Yeah,
100%
I mean,
of the business. Like, what were your learnings that came out of that?
yeah, I think like the simple thing that people always say, like, don't ever get into business with friends and family. I don't necessarily agree with. Yes, this didn't work out because this was a friend, but I can also say that you know, somewhere around that time, right, a little bit before that time, I had hired on my sister and she's still here today, and we
Yeah.
work very well together. And I think what it really comes down to, and that's when I first started learning the importance of these core values was back then.
Okay.
And that's where I knew all of our conflicts were coming from. If I want to provide remarkable service, but the other person tells the employee, I'm not here. Tell them, make up some lie, right? We're creating two different messages to employees, and it creates a lot of confusion and just morale problems and toxicity. So that was really it. That was my first school of hard knocks on the values, and we become more and more selective over time. If people come on now, we see right away that there's a problem with that attitude or core value gap. We have that discussion one time, but then we, help them find happiness elsewhere.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. And so, do you interview when you're doing pre-employment process? Are you asking about the core values, or are you judging people against the core values based on their answers?
Absolutely. It's interviewing is a critical component. I actually uh, One of my mentors is actually he's a detective. He's actually one of the leading homicide interrogators here in Connecticut. He has over five homicide convictions based on admissions, which is pretty wild, like just to watch him go at it. But he's really like we've worked together on
Just
crafting.
to clarify, he was the detective. He didn't was not the one who committed the homicide. So.
Yes, he's the good guy. He's the good guy. But we've really crafted some awesome questions for interviewing techniques. He's helped me up that game, and really throwing kind of curveballs at people, seeing how they answer things, and really getting to the truth. And asking what people, just for example, what does above and beyond mean to you, right? That's an open-ended question, and you really why don't you, actually let's go for it. What would you say? What is
Oh
above and
boy.
beyond to you? Yeah,
What does above and beyond mean to me?
yeah.
It's there's the stated job description or the stated working hours or the stated process, but the more important thing is to get the outcome. So if you need to go above and beyond the standard, do that to get the outcome. You cannot say, well, I followed the 17 steps of our process, but did you get the outcome? The example I always give is because I was in the publishing industry, and there would be occasionally printing mistakes in the magazine. And so you would have to issue a make good to the advertiser. And so people would propose, let's give them a discount, let's do this. And the question was, well, first, how does that align with what we did before? But then also, does it actually make it good? Are they going to say, I'm still angry or this is unfair? You can't just say, well, that's what we've done before. Does it actually make it good? So, Steve,
Right.
how did I do?
I think you did great, right? There's a bar and you're shooting above the bar when you go above and beyond. And you kind of find out where people's bar is when you ask them that question, especially if you ask them like what, describe that for you. Like, what about your job? What do you do right now? And I'll give you a recent example. We had somebody who said, doing what you said you were going to do. And I said, okay, well, I would say that's good, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But like where is she coming from, right? And what's the level of the bar over there? It's people don't even do what they said they're going to do. So going above and beyond for them is simply the standard over here, right?
Yes. Yes.
So you have filter questions like that to really see like what framework people are coming from. But I think beyond interviewing, right, there's also training that needs to go into
Mhm.
place. And that's our big thing for this year. We hired a customer experience consultant and really working on taking us to that next Zappos level.
Got it. Interesting. I also have to say you brought up the detective as such, helped you from an interview standpoint. The best hiring manager I ever worked with, his name was John Dudenhofer, and he was for, I think, 7 or 8 years, a military police officer. And boy, did that guy know how to ask very benign but very precise questions and not let on in terms of the path that he was going to go down. The things that some people ended up confessing to him because he got them so relaxed, were, I'll just say, very
Yeah.
helpful to know in the
Yep.
pre-interview process. You wouldn't have wanted to brought that
Totally.
person on board.
No, you're spot on there, and that's really it, right? You want to get people into their safe place, and so that they can be honest and transparent with you, and you reward them for being honest and transparent, and they give you more. And really, at the end of the day, I'm also honest and transparent with people, like if we can or we can't take them. Um, and we had a guy. I navigated a very tricky situation one time. He had extreme religious beliefs that uh, disabled him from working with certain groups of people. Um, and so I asked him straight up. I said, "Listen, you know, um, how would that affect you right here? If you were on the job and you were meeting with a gay business owner, would you have to preach to them or could you keep those two worlds separate?"
Yeah,
And I said, to be honest, I'd be compelled. I'd have to bring that
yeah,
into work. So he asked me, I said, he goes, at the end of the interview, I'm assuming I'm not going to get the job. And I said, listen, it's not about not getting the job because of religion. It's because, right, we have to keep certain things separate at work, and create a professional environment, an inclusive environment for everybody, but I think that you're super passionate about what you do. You should look for something in that realm, right? So you leave off on that good note, you're transparent and you can navigate through some pretty like tricky waters.
yeah. But going back to, like, that's a good example of being demanding but supportive at the same time. You didn't say, get the heck out of here. You didn't say, well,
Right,
I guess we have to do whatever, people are inclined towards doing, or, follow whatever they do. There was a standard of, you need to sell to these people, or you need to work with, these kind of individuals. If they say no, then it's for whatever the reason is, right?
right,
Whatever it's based in. So
right.
yeah, that's the more the difficult practical application
Sure.
of leading, being demanding, and being supportive at the same time. Got
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you for that. So, you talked about, the experience that it had with that, I guess, the bad breakup. Can you talk about, I'd say, since then, and just, we're recording this for our audience. We're recording this partway
Sure.
through January, so still thinking New Year's resolutions. My 2025 resolution is be brave enough to ask this question to every leader who appears on the Trusted Advisor. So, don't bite my head off with this. So, can you tell us about a mistake that you've made as a leader and what you learned from it? It can be a recent mistake, it can be from a long time ago, it can be a
Sure.
colossal disaster, or it could just be a time where maybe you fell short of meeting your own standards.
Sure. I mean, it's such an open-ended question. I think if I reflect backwards, there's tons of mistakes. I'd say one personal characteristic, though, that I've really become aware of and I really been trying to work on is I have a tendency to fight fire with fire. So if somebody comes at me guns blazing, I might be right in what I said. I might be justified in what I said. It might also be mean and not kind and not the right timing to say what I have to do. So me personally, it's working on how to fight fire with water.
Hmm.
And I think if you ever read the book with Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, right? He talks about there's a space between stimulus and reaction, and that's where I need to go into is that get into that middle space before I react and really figure out what's the optimal response to the situation.
So how do you do that? Like, what technique do you use? And while you're contemplating that, one of my former bosses, he would have that on occasion. Him and his brother
Sure.
would both had very, very short tempers, and they'd snap at people. They started doing reading. There was a document they had called the Man is like with Inner Balance is what it was. And remember, he talked to me and said, like, if you catch me doing any of these things, let me know. Okay. And I'm like,
Sure,
oh, yeah, you do this one all the time. He's like, I was hoping we wouldn't start like right now. But it was very helpful to be able to say to him when he would get angry or he could tend to like mock people instead of they said this, oh, they said this and do, do, do. Right. But he opened up the door for everybody around him to catch it because he
sure.
knew he wasn't good catching it himself. So I guess how do you, move forward and get good at
Yeah.
that?
Well, I mean, that raises a good point too, is, nobody wants to necessarily correct the boss, right? So it's tough to get that feedback out of other people.
Yeah.
Have I done 360s in the past, things like that? Yes. What I think is really the most effective is time, right? So kind of just use time as your ally. If somebody says something that is hurtful or offensive or disrespectful, right? Buy yourself some time before you make your response. Maybe it's a breath work technique, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's kick the can, right? Maybe it's an email or a text message. And I got one yesterday that's still sitting in my box that I wanted to respond to right away. But I said, it's actually with a family member.
Yeah. Okay.
And I say, what, I'm just gonna wait till tomorrow and cooler heads prevail, right? So take a little book page out of Stoicism, right? And I
Yeah.
think
Mm-hmm.
that's what it is. It's mastering our emotions. I think that's where journaling, that's where meditation comes into play, right? Reflecting on those things. And if you give enough time, the right answer comes to you. And the other person kind of also cools down too. So that's why I really think that's the way to go. But believe me, I get tested once in a while and I don't always pass the test. So
Yeah, but if you're mindful of it, then you can say, how can I do better next
right.
time, right? You're not going to necessarily get perfect right away
Yeah.
and go from there. Stoicism, that's a great, I don't know if you've read Ryan Holiday's work, The Obstacle is the Way, things of
Yes.
that nature. Talks about embracing the things you run into instead of being angry at them, saying, what can I learn from this? I also worked down the hallway from a psychotherapist, and she started burning into my brain instead of reacting to people, saying, I wonder what is causing them, what happened in their life that would cause them to behave this way,
Bingo.
right?
Yep.
And you start empathizing with them as opposed to that person's a jerk.
That's
So,
actually a great point there. Another awesome book on that. Actually, I have it right here in my office.
all right, good. So, for those not watching on video,
I'll
Steve
grab
is
it. I'll
walking
get it.
across his office to grab the book. The
It's
Four
called The Four
Agreements.
Agreements. And one of them right in here, there's actually four, right? But one is don't take anything personally. And I think it goes right to your point, right? Take a step back, realize it's not you, it's actually coming from a place in them. It's kind of like that hurt people, right?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
So
Exactly right.
don't take it personally and you can cool down and go from there. Um, that's really it.
I appreciate it. One of my last questions for you, who are some leaders that you look up to as mentors and have helped you shape your leadership approach? I'd say beyond the you said like that academic, getting the direct feedback, and like what did they do that's had a lasting impact on you?
Sure. I'd say that I have mentors is a big deal for me. I think I have mentors in a lot of different areas. I think if you want to grow in any domain, you need a mentor there. So, but let's focus on business. And in the business sense, I think my biggest mentor throughout my whole life was my father.
Hmm.
Um, as a kid, I grew up seeing him start a company, which he's grown into pretty much the biggest tile, marble, stone fabricator distributor in New England.
Wow.
Over 100 employees. So I've literally seen it go from me working in the sweatshop gluing tiles on a board when I was a kid, which I'll say is my only job I ever punched in for. $5 an hour. To seeing him to where he grew now. And I think a great part of mentorship is when you get to the stage where you call each other for help, right? So,
Mm.
not only do I seek his advice, but I'm also honored to give back when he calls me and asks me a business question. Outside of that, I stumbled across this idea from the book. What is it called? Think and Grow Rich. They talk about
Yeah,
having
yeah.
mastermind groups. So here at Turnkey, I created a mastermind group. I joined a CEO mentor group as well. And I attend those things. I make time for that. A lot of people say I don't have time for these things. I actually devote one day a month to my mastermind group. And over the last 5 years, that's also helped me grow leaps and bounds because, you have 14 other bright CEO minds in the room challenging you, pushing you beyond what your beliefs are or what your stereotypes are, or, you know, helping you raise the bar for yourself. So I think, and sometimes just super helpful to solve a problem, right? So I think we all need to develop those kind of groups in our life.
And to tie one of your earlier points together, those mastermind groups, they tend to not take personally the situation, right? Because they're detached emotionally from what you're doing in the day to day. And so they don't care if they're able to say, well, that seems
You're
really
always
dumb,
right.
or, yeah,
Yeah.
well, right. And they're able to just to give, some benign
It's kind of
business
like when
advice.
it's kind of like when you're a kid and all your friends are like, you got to break up with her, you know?
Yeah, right.
Or you're telling the same friend over and over, listen, man, it's the writing's on the wall. It's very simple. You got to break up with them. And then
Yeah,
finally, years later, it happens like, well, I knew it. It's not a big
yeah,
surprise.
that's right. But if
So
you're
it's
engaged in the emotion of it, yeah, she's not that into
correct,
you.
correct. So that's exactly it. And the more you can actually start to perceive that and become aware of it, the faster you can make decisions, and ultimately the better you're going to be, right? Like if you
Yep.
stay in bad relationships, in your personal life or in business for 5, 6, 10 years, all it's doing is just chipping away at your ability to grow.
Yes. And stealing time, right? Any time that you spend in,
Time,
in that is not
energy,
going to.
everything. Yep.
And so again, just for everybody following to keep up with it. So the four agreements, I have not read that. I'm going to add that to my reading list. And then Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. So not only is Steve
Yes.
recommending it, this Steve Martorelli, Steve Kuntz, the late CEO and co-founder of Blue Star, that was a book that he would always preach. And Steve, just so you know, when I was at his memorial service, that's one of the things that I mentioned. I was like, who in this room has read Think and Grow Rich? And usually when you ask that in a normal group, maybe one or two hands go up. Like half the room, if not more, went up, and it was like, "Oh yeah, Steve said you've got to make sure you read the book." So take it from the late Steve Kuntz and Steve here today. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It's an
Awesome.
unusual book, but it has
Yeah.
a lot of good
And
messages to it.
and I will put one disclaimer on that book too. Remember, it was written in a different time and a different era. There's some weird stories in there where it might rub you the wrong way, right? From from where we are today. Just remember it was written with good intent in the time that it was written.
Yeah, there are elements of it where you're going like, "This is great advice," and then a page later you're like, "This guy's crazy."
This is crazy, yeah.
Yes,
It's a little
but
bit
it's
mystical too, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes, it is a fun roller coaster ride. Just, I remember reading that when my daughter was in third grade, practicing for a talent show. And so every night I would drop her off and then wait for her. And so I was reading that in the hallway of an elementary school. And I wonder somebody who had read the book was probably walking by going like, why is he reading that thing here? But Napoleon Hill, there's one of a kind. So, well, last thing for you, Steve. So we've covered a ton today. I'm curious if you have like final advice for our audience. Like, let's say you have a 3-minute Lyft or Uber ride with a small business leader, and they're like, "Hey, I'm an aspiring small business leader. What advice would you give to them and give to our audience today?"
Sure. Um, I would say actually I got 3-second advice, and it's this: you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. So if you want better, you need to become better, and the results are going to follow. And that's, I think, really the driving force behind Remarkablism. If you improve, you'll see those improvements in your business. If you get more power and use it responsibly, you continue to get more, right? So, there's a balance between personal growth and then what you do with the success, right? Do you squander your resources or do you reinvest in yourself and your people, right? And that kind of gets super philosophical too, but what is the point of money at the end of the day? And I think it's really to help us flourish, right, as people. So how do we become the best people? What are the things that we can do to get ourselves there? And I think if everybody kind of takes that philosophy to heart, I think a lot of people will be a lot happier and more well off and healthier.
I love it. Very well said. Bob Chapman, we interviewed him. He took a company from 20 million to 3.4 million, interviewed him late last year. And he said, like, when I look back on my career, it's not the products, it's not the stuff, right? It's the people that we develop and the people that we impact. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing. And if you want to do that, you've got to, like I said, if you want to achieve that, you've got to attract, you've got to be that and help other people.
Absolutely.
Love it. Well, that does it for this episode of The Trusted Advisor. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to subscribe to the RSPA YouTube channel and the Trusted Advisor podcast so you never miss an episode. Before we go, big thanks again to Steve Martorelli for sharing his wisdom with us today. Thanks also to RSP Marketing Director Chris Arnold for his production work, Joseph McDade for our music, and last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. Our goal at the RSPA is to accelerate the success of our members in the retail technology ecosystem by providing knowledge and connections. For more information, visit our website at gorspa.org. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, everybody.
Bye, Jim.